Welcome. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to have a conversation with Peter Piot. He is, as you just saw, I guess it just left on the screen, the executive director of UNAIDS, which is an interesting entity in the UN that works across the entire system on AIDS. And Peter's also the Undersecretary General of the United Nations on AIDS and has brought tremendous leadership to the issue. Started this task, heading up this initiative 12 years ago in 1995. It was actually the first director of this new entity. It's an unusual one for the UN. And really has worked hard to put AIDS on the agenda of political leaders around the world, but not just political leaders, all kinds of different groups in and outside of the UN. And I think it's brought a particularly new angle when the issue of AIDS in the UN moved out of the World Health Organization, where it was very specifically a medical focus. Now, a lot of the work has expanded it to look at AIDS as a lens on a number of different issues, which we've talked about in the last couple of days a little bit, how looking only at the medical issue doesn't necessarily solve a problem that has so many other dimensions to it. And certainly in his tenure at UNAIDS has looked at the realms of social and economic development and human security, which is a critical one. I won't go long into the bio, which you have in your books. Peter's got an MD and a PhD in microbiology, so we've heard a little bit about biology in the last couple of days. Just want to introduce you, and today we're going to talk about the future of AIDS. But first, I think, since we probably have different levels of awareness about what's going on with AIDS in the world, I'd like to ask you to tell us a little bit about what the state of the epidemic is today.
Well, thanks, Heidi. Good morning, everybody. In 25 years since the discovery of AIDS, I was in '81, AIDS has made it to one of the defining issues of our time, and certainly of the 21st century. And cumulatively, about 65 million people have become infected since the early '80s. And all these people are connected with each other. It gives you another meaning of globalization, of what the networks are, and of blood relatives, because every single of these 65 million people have had either sex with each other, had a mother who was HIV positive, had shared needles, or received a blood transfusion from somebody who has it. That's talking about global connectivity. Here we are. Today, of these 65 million people, 40 million are still alive. This is the number of people living with HIV in the world. 25 million have died in the meantime because of lack of access to treatment. And every single day, 8,000 people are dying from AIDS, and about 12,000 are becoming infected every single day. And I would say there are three basic trends that I can observe at the moment in terms of the epidemic. The first one is globalization. What started as a problem in the West was first documented here in California. Then we still have the epicenter in southern Africa and eastern Africa, where we have countries where 20, 30 to close to 40% of all adults are HIV positive. Just imagine what that would mean in your state or on the level of the US. But now it's globalizing. And actually the fastest growing HIV epidemic is in the former Soviet republics, in Russia, in the first place. We heard about Russia this morning, but Russia now has well over 1 million people living with HIV. What was not discussed this morning, but Russia is confronted with a major demographic crisis. It is losing about 700,000 people every single year as a country. Add to that an epidemic like HIV, where most people are still healthy but will die because of inadequate access to treatment soon. We see also major spread in India, over 5 million people with HIV already, and in China, particularly in two areas. One, the southwestern and extreme western provinces, Xinjiang and Yunnan, in ethnic minorities, and spread through injecting drug use, with heroin coming either from Burma or from Afghanistan, and then in the new economic areas with floating populations and the young entrepreneurs. As they say in China, AIDS is a disease of 3M, mobile men with money. Second trend is feminization of the epidemic. Remember what started as a disease of white, middle-class, gay men in the West. Today, half of all 40 million people with HIV are women. In Africa, it's about 60%, and the proportion of women is increasing everywhere, including in this country. And that changes completely how we have to deal with this epidemic. And thirdly, we're starting to see the impact of AIDS in the worst affected societies. Already 14 million orphans in Africa, because for every adult who dies, certainly in a heterosexual epidemic, children are left behind. But also impact on business. Anglo-American, for example, estimate that the price of 1 ounce of gold, of producing it, has increased by close to $10 because of AIDS, loss of productivity and so on. So these are some of the big trends, I would say.
Well, we've heard about China and Russia, but we hadn't heard about that dimension in the last couple days. We certainly haven't solved this problem as much as the work has gone on, and there's a lot more to do. How are we doing in the response? I mean, there's clearly areas where we need a lot more work, and what have science and technology brought us that have helped?
Yeah, I've been working on AIDS since '83, basically full-time. I started in Central Africa, in Kinshasa, and last year was the first time that in UNAIDS we could bring out a report that was not only doom and gloom and only negative. I think we're going through, let's say, a triple momentum. First of all, we're starting to see a return on the investments. Why am I saying that? Because we have now in about 2 million people on antiretroviral therapy in poor countries, low and middle income countries. That's up from about 200,000 5 years ago, when it was thought that this was plainly impossible. We also see a decline in new infections in many East African countries, in southern Indian states, in Cambodia, in the Caribbean. So that's the impact of prevention programs. And the second part of the momentum is a political momentum. I think one of the big successes of UNAIDS has been that we have been able to put AIDS on the political agenda. And when President Bush in 2003, in the State of the Union, said, you know, I'm putting $15 billion on the table to fight one of the biggest problems of our time, that changed completely the global landscape in terms of funding and political commitment when the president of the most powerful state in the world made that kind of commitment. And we're seeing it a bit everywhere, this political momentum. And thirdly, there's a financial momentum. When UNAIDS was founded, there was about $250 million available and spent on AIDS in developing countries. This year it will be around $10 billion. This is not only money that's coming from the rich countries, but also from, you know, domestic spending, about 1/3. But there are also some worrisome trends. Early successes like we had in Uganda and in Thailand have been reversed. We see a doubling of new infections in Thailand, in Uganda over the last couple of years. A result of complacency, treatment introduced, and thinking we made it. This is a phenomenon we see also across all Western countries. And secondly, anti-condom propaganda and campaigns by fundamentalist groups. So a combination of that really makes me very worried about that what we have acquired is we shouldn't take for granted. Science and technology, what you asked, spectacular success in terms of treatment. AIDS is the first serious viral illness for which we have a treatment. It's not a cure. A cure would mean you can stop the treatment and the virus has disappeared from your body. But we have treatment that provides good quality of life. I mean, in UNAIDS, as probably in many of the companies, we've got plenty of colleagues, you know, who are on antiretroviral therapy and work very hard without problems. The challenge there has been access. How can the world benefit from the products of innovation? When it comes to a vaccine, HIV vaccine, there are no results. I remember that in 1984, Margaret Heckler, who was then Secretary for Health and Human Services, announced that an American, Bob Gallo, had discovered the AIDS virus, and that within 5 years there would be a vaccine. When you ask anybody working on HIV vaccines today, when will there be a vaccine? You get the same answer, within 5 years. And the good news is there is far more investments in it, and big companies, like Merck, for example, is making a major effort. But what we need is probably not so much more money, but better sharing of information, and above all, some basic scientific breakthrough. This is the smartest virus that we know. And where we were yesterday at the Cal IT2, one of the beautiful posters, art, was about an enzyme, protease, that you find in HIV, in the virus. And it's the best studied virus, but we still don't understand very well how can we prevent the virus from attacking those cells that normally are supposed to defend us and are the basis for any vaccine. It's the Trojan horse strategy that the virus uses with a lot of success.
So, related to also some of the things we've been hearing in the last couple of days, we have the famous condom that has its fundamentalist anti-condom propaganda. We have treatments that are great for extending quality of life, don't cure it, but have led to a certain amount of complacency in some areas that people have a treatment so they relax a bit, and on the prevention front, and a vaccine that we haven't had. So we have some breakthroughs, but there's still a lot of other work around it that's needed to make the science and technology actually have an impact, it seems like. So tell us about this aids2031 initiative and what prompted you to come up with this idea with so much to do right now. Why look 25 years ahead?
Yeah, people like me and others dealing with AIDS, we've been basically into crisis management for the last 20, 25 years. But now that we're starting to see results, there is some time to look at what are the implications of what we're doing today. And just a few facts. 2 million people on treatment. There's actually a need for 7 million people today who need that. But how are we going to move to that target? 10, 20, 30 years from now, who's going to pay for antiretroviral therapy in developing countries, in poor countries? In China, they will be able to pay for it, in Russia and so on, but in the poorest countries in Africa, no. So what's the fiscal sustainability here? We've created massive programs of entitlement with taxpayers' money from the rich countries. You can even question whether these countries are sovereign when hundreds of thousands of the citizens depend for their daily survival on money from the outside to take the pill. Also, for every person who is put on antiretroviral therapy in the developing world, there are 6 new infections. So in other words, we add every day 12,000 people who become infected. We've not really addressed the drivers of this epidemic. I mentioned 50% are women. Well, gender inequality is definitely the major driver of this epidemic. So we need to take a long-term view. And I think this is what we're seeing in climate change. We see something that is a long-term, a long-wave phenomenon is becoming a short-wave phenomenon. It's really accelerating. With AIDS, we go a bit the other way around. From a short-term crisis, we go to something that we have to look at now in decades and in generations. And what we need to do is to learn how we can tackle what is seemingly intractable problems over decades, and going away from the terror of the quarterly report, the annual budgets, and so on. You can't deal with a thing like AIDS or climate change on an annual, fiscal basis. So what we're trying to do is looking at several things. What are the implications of our actions today? We've not done that. Surprisingly. We jumped into the water and we tried to swim and go for it. And I think that was the right way to approach. If we would have been paralyzed by the 100 obstacles that are there to introduce antiretroviral therapy in the developing world, we still would have had these discussions. So better to move and then see how we can fix it all. Secondly is what do we need to do today to have the best possible outcome 20, 30 years from now. The code name of the name of our project, the consortium I'm putting together is aids2031. Why? It's 50 years after the description of AIDS. And we want really nothing less than change the course of history, because the economic and social development and even security in big parts of the world is going to be determined in a big way whether we can bring AIDS under control or not. When 1/3 of your population has an incurable disease, that's destabilizing a country. When I met with Premier Wen Jiabao 2 years ago, after many years of denial of AIDS in China, his opening statement was, AIDS is a new type of security problem. And I knew then we had it. And that's because it's a cause of instability. So we're working with, like you're doing here, or what we're doing here, across disciplines, breaking down the walls, challenging conventional wisdom, take a cold and hard look at what we're doing. It's a multidisciplinary consortium. We're going to have some events with Google. We're working with the Global Business Network, with Google also, because this is about young people. So, and at the end of the day, we'll have an investment plan and a call for the future.
It sounds ambitious, but I think it sounds needed also. We just have about 5 minutes left. I'd like to leave a couple minutes for questions, but just, you've been here at FiRe for the past couple days. What's the most important thing for the people here to understand, aside from just what you've been explaining about the status of things?
Well, I think there is a real epidemic going on in the world and affecting lives of many people. It's not a hypothetical one like the bird flu, which may never come. This is real. And in major parts of the world, it's affecting business, it's affecting markets, and it should be part of any risk assessment of the environment one works on. And secondly, I would say, it's not because you're not a medical doctor that you can't contribute. We've seen, we need doctors when it comes to treatment and the whole healthcare industry. But HIV prevention, dealing with the damage, the impact, that requires the efforts of the brightest minds of our time. And they're here.
I think we have a number of them here, yeah. A question, Stuart.
Peter Stuart Brand, last night you were saying something that shook me, which is that 25 years on with AIDS, it appears that the longer we go not defeating AIDS, the harder it is to defeat AIDS. That's horrifying.
Yeah.
You want to break that down a bit?
Yeah, we're paying today the price of inaction of many years. If we would have the resources and the political will and the commitment we have today fighting AIDS, we would have had that 10 years ago, not to mention 20 years ago. We would never have had 65 million people, 25 million deaths. So that's the price of inaction is very big, because it becomes more and more difficult to deal with a phenomenon like AIDS when it becomes older, it's diffusing in society. Today in Africa, for example, 90% of people who become infected with HIV did not show any quote-unquote high-risk behavior. Actually, among women, it's housewives. So it becomes more difficult to deal with it. Secondly, we have biology. There is the virus itself becomes more and more diverse genetically. We don't know what that means. As an optimist, you can say it's going to attenuate its virulence, but it could also make it more difficult. And we know that that can be the case, particularly when we have evolutionary pressure, like introduction of treatment. What is that going to give? Now, one of the big lessons is act early in this kind of phenomenon, even if the future, by definition, is uncertain. And anything can happen. It's not, who would have thought, you know, when I was in medical school the last year, I went to my professors and asked, what should I do? Which I had several options. And when I mentioned infectious disease, they said, oh, forget it. You know, it's finished. It's all done. No future. And 2 years later, I the team discovered the Ebola virus in my young life. You know, in my short life, I've seen so many new demics, and we'll see more.
Any other questions? Well, I think that we have a huge task ahead, and I think that the challenges, I mean, what are the biggest challenges we have right now? I mean, you've painted the picture, but...
Yeah, I would say for me, the first one is to keep AIDS on the agenda. Take California, the Bay Area, and so where I was a few weeks ago, you would assume the highest level of knowledge about HIV in the whole world. And yet there is enormous complacency at the individual level, but also politically. The half-life of any political attention is short, and until the next elections in the very best case. And we've learned over the last decades that it's the politics, activism, that really has made a difference in AIDS. It has not been plus the discovery of treatment. I mean, a combination of that has really been driving the response and has resulted in saving lives. That's my number one priority also in my job. Secondly is making the money work for people on the ground. That's the mantra in UNAIDS. Every staff member knows that $10 billion, let's make sure that we can have the best out of it. We work a lot with business to make sure that the marginalized populations, that people in hard-to-reach cities and so on, that they're having access. Thirdly is having this long-term view. And we need your help for this. I think that the minds that I see here at FiRe has really been very inspiring to me because of the lateral thinking, the interdisciplinary nature of what we're trying to do. That's what we need to defeat this epidemic.
Great. I was just thinking last year at FiRe, I was interviewing Larry Brilliant on the influenza epidemic, and he was saying that the surprises, the importance of being alert to surprises, and that we couldn't have, because he had worked a lot in smallpox eradication, that we couldn't have attempted to eradicate smallpox eradication had HIV been out there, because we couldn't have done the mass immunization. So the importance of not taking things for granted and knowing that the interaction of the different things is pretty critical. It's
all connected.
You know,
we talked a lot about climate change. Climate change will give massive population movements, increased risk for HIV, and so on. I mean, we need to, that interconnectivity of our world is so clear because of AIDS now.
Great. Thanks very much.